Hey guys, this is your tutorial for Friday, February 12th. Make sure you fill out the attendance link so we can give you credit for doing your classwork today. A couple of reminders. Make sure you complete your pedigree notes, which we're going to talk about today during this recording, and that you submit it in Google Classroom. And then make sure you take a peek at your pedigree vocab that has been assigned because it's due on the 25th, which is a Thursday. So your copy or your template of these notes can be found under the Classwork tab in Google Classroom, so make sure you pull up your copy now and we'll get started. So our next section we're taking notes on is about pedigree charts and genetic disorders. So a pedigree chart is just a chart that shows how a trait is passed on through generations within a family. Specifically, if there is a genetic disorder that's common in your family, pedigree charts are used to see how that genetic disorder has been passed down through generations. It looks at the gender and it looks at how that trait is passed along. Pedigree charts are really useful whenever you have large families because then you get a big overall picture of how that specific genetic disorder or trait has been passed along and tracked throughout several generations. This is a picture of a pedigree chart. You'll see that there are squares and circles and different lines and Roman numerals, and some of the shapes are shaded in. They all mean specific things, and those specific things we're going to talk about on the next slide. So for the symbols, if it's a square, it represents a male. Okay, so a square is the gender of a male. A circle is the female, represents a female on the pedigree chart. Now you'll see some are shaded and some aren't shaded. If the shape is not shaded in, like you see here and these two down here, if they're not shaded in, that means they're not infected by the disorder or that they don't carry the trait that you're tracking. If the shape is shaded in, like you see here and here, that means that person has the disorder or has the trait that you're tracking. If you ever see a shape that is half shaded, then that would mean that they're a carrier of the trait, that trait is genetic and that it's recessive, and so it's just carrying that recessive trait, that they didn't end up with it, but they carry it. That would be half shaded. A vertical line, which is a line up and down, means that they had children, and a horizontal line means that they've mated. So if you go back and look at this, here the horizontal line, right, means that they are married. Your vertical line with the bracket means that they had kids. Okay, so that's how you look at that. Now, practicing on your own. This square that's open should be an unaffected male, and the shaded in square is an affected male. They have the trait. The non-shaded in circle means that they don't have the trait, they are unaffected, and it's a female. And then this circle that's shaded in is an affected female, meaning they have the trait. This shows the marriage between female and male. Okay, and because these two down here are not shaded, they are normal. They don't have the trait. So when we look at the different generations throughout a family and we're tracking the trait, we identify the generations by Roman numerals. So this would be generation 1, this would be generation 2, generation 3, and generation 4. Now the mode of inheritance, or how that trait is being passed down, usually pedigree charts are tracking recessive traits because the majority of disorders are recessive, but they can also track dominant traits as well. So here's an example of a recessive trait being tracked. Okay, if they have both recessive alleles, it's shaded in, they have the recessive trait. These could technically be half shaded. If it's half shaded, it just means they carry it. So it's carrying the recessive trait. And then if it's 2 capital letters, it would be completely unshaded. Now, if you are tracking a dominant trait, you're not going to have any half shades for carriers because they have the dominant trait, and dominant always overrides recessive. So any allele combination that has a dominant trait or a capital letter, it gets completely shaded in, showing that it has the trait. The only way it's not shaded in a dominant example is if it's completely recessive. All right. So with shading, some pedigree charts will half shade for you and let you know who's carriers, but the majority of pedigree charts are not going to half shade for you, and you have to figure out if that shape should be half shaded or not. Okay? A good thing to remember is that the majority of pedigree charts are tracking recessive traits, so that's something to keep in mind. So let's practice. Here, the individuals that must be half shaded are person 1 in generation 1, and persons 3 and 6 in generation 2. Okay, see the arrows are pointing to all those people I was just talking about. The reason they would have to be half shaded is because if we're tracking a recessive trait here, that would mean this person would have 2 little letters, so they could only offer a recessive trait. So half of it recessive came from mom, but yet this individual also got another recessive trait, which means dad has to be half shaded as well. Same for this situation. All these 2 people got married and all of their children were infected, which means dad had to have carried that infected trait. And then same for this example. Okay, he had to be half shaded as well. If they weren't half shaded, none of their kids would show the trait. So this one says write the genotypes for the individuals below. So the genotypes are written in for you for this first part. This square is big A, little a, and the one shaded in, the mom shaded in here, has 2 recessive letters. When they pass it on, because this is completely shaded in, it means they have to have the recessive trait, so that means they got the little a from dad and a little a from mom. Same for this female, same for this female. Now, this female married a male, but yet all of their kids ended up with that recessive trait, which means the male had to have carried that recessive trait too. So 1 capital, 1 lowercase, and same for this scenario as well. All of these remaining shapes with this family really could be big A or big A, little a. Since none of these are completely shaded in to be all recessive, that means that any of these could have just 1 dominant letter, or they could have 2 dominant letters for the genotype. So here's some practice. What does this pedigree chart show? So looking at this pedigree chart, how many people are unaffected carriers, meaning they carry the trait but they don't have it? So count how many are half shaded. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now how many people are affected by the disorder? So how many people are shaded in? 1, 2. How many carriers are female? So our half shaded circles is what we're looking for. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if only one parent is a carrier, what's the probability of having a child with the disorder? Okay, so if only one parent's a carrier and the other parent has all dominant traits, there's no way their kid's going to have the disorder, so it's 0%. Now let's talk about some genetic disorders. A genetic disorder is an abnormal condition that a person inherits through genes or chromosomes. So it can be caused by a mutation in DNA on the genes, or it can be caused by an abnormal number of chromosomes that a person has, either too many or too little chromosomes. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic disorder where your body produces really thick mucus and it gets lodged in your lungs and in your intestines, and it causes you to cough a lot, and it's like you can barely get anything moving inside of you. Because the mucus is so thick, it makes it really hard for you to breathe. And this is a recessive trait, so it's carried on a recessive allele on a chromosome, and it's typically because of a mutation on the DNA. Sickle cell disease is also a genetic disorder, but this is going to affect the hemoglobin, which is a protein in your blood that carries oxygen. So whenever your oxygen concentrations are low, the blood cells end up getting a sickle cell shaped. The sickle shape is going to end up clogging these blood vessels, right? So normal red blood cells are circular shaped. But sickle cell disease causes these sickle-shaped blood cells to lodge in the blood vessels and prevent oxygen to being carried to all parts like they need to be. This disease or disorder is a disorder that has a normal allele and then a codominant allele. What that means is it has another allele that can change the genetic disorder or the situation, the genetics to cause a disorder. A person with two sickle-shaped alleles are definitely going to have the disease. If there's only one allele that's affected, then the person's going to make normal shaped cells, and then it's also going to produce some sickle-shaped cells as well. These people typically don't have the hardcore symptoms of other people with this disease. Hemophilia is another genetic disorder, and that's where your blood clots really slowly or not really at all, and it's because it lacks a protein that's needed for normal blood clotting. People who have this protein, when you get cut, your blood clots, forms a scab, bleeding stops, right? But if people have hemophilia and they lack that blood clotting protein, even the smallest bump or bruise can cause internal bleeding or bleeding that cannot be controlled. Okay, because the blood doesn't clot and stop the bleeding. This is also caused by a recessive allele on the X chromosome, which makes this a sex-linked trait because it's only carried on the X chromosome. It occurs most frequently in males because this is a sex-linked disorder. So if you look here, females have XX as their chromosomes and male have XY. Okay? If mom is carrying an infected X that could lead to hemophilia, and she gives that infected X to her daughter, well, to be a girl, she has to get XX, which means dad had to give her a good X, so she's just a carrier. She's not affected by it. Okay? But what about the son? In order to be a male, you have to have the combination XY, and only the dad can give the Y. So the dad gave the Y to make it a male, and the mom gave her infected X. Well, there's not another X to combat that, so that boy automatically gets it. Okay, so sex-linked disorders occur most frequently in males because they don't have another X to hide the genetic disorder. The next genetic disorder is Down syndrome, and that's where you have an extra copy of chromosome 21. So instead of just having 2 copies of all the chromosomes like normal, a person with Down syndrome has a 3rd copy, so an extra copy. This most often occurs whenever the chromosomes fail to separate properly during meiosis. People with Down syndrome can have some level or some degree of mental retardation, not always. They can have heart defects, but that can be treated. Okay, so Down syndrome is actually very common with older mothers who have pregnancies later in life. Now, whenever you have a genetic disorder, doctors used to only have Punnett squares and pedigree charts to help them predict genetic disorders, but now they have tools such as karyotypes, which show an exact picture of the chromosomes. So that helps them see if there's a chromosomal abnormality, and if there is, they can figure out which genetic disorder is occurring. Now, people with genetic disorders can be helped through medical care, education, they can have job training, and other methods to help them live a normal life. This is an example of a karyotype. Karyotypes show an exact picture of what each pair of chromosomes should look like, right? So it's exact pictures of the chromosomes in a cell. They are always arranged in a pair, and they can reveal whether a person has the correct number of chromosomes, which can lead to a prediction of a genetic disorder if there are not the correct number of chromosomes. Now, with genetic disorders, if you have a family history of genetic disorders, then you can go to genetic counseling for advice to see the probability of you passing on those traits to your children. So genetic counseling helps couples understand their chance of passing on a specific genetic disorder to their child. If you have a genetic disorder, there are several ways to cope and to deal with these genetic disorders. Sometimes there's medical treatments, so medications that they can take. For example, physical therapy is common with people who have cystic fibrosis because it beats on the back and removes the mucus from inside the lungs. You can take folic acid for people with sickle cell disease to help them make more red blood cells. And then education and job training is common with people who have Down syndrome to help them find work and still live a normal life. If you have any questions, make sure you ask your teacher, and I hope you have a great day.